Well, welcome to part two of the Book of Titus. I've subtitled this Crate, We Have a Problem. And as I mentioned to you last time in the first part of the introduction to this book, and we did a lot of legwork then, this came from basically an idea that yes, there were some problems in the churches there, but there was also a situation with Titus that he had written to Paul and wanted out. And Titus had been sort of a troubleshooter for the Apostle Paul. He would send him to churches that needed fired up and corrected, and he'd do a good job with that. But evidently, he was tired or discouraged or whatever it was and wanted to go. So I'm going to pick this up today and just review one thing as we look at the introduction part two. And I shared, as I closed off last time, with the terrific trios. There are three pastoral epistles or letters that Paul wrote to two men. 1st and 2nd Timothy to Timothy, and then, of course, to Titus. And these men were converts of the Apostle Paul. These men were right-hand men and greatly used of the Lord. So there's no criticism of them. They were no different than us, and we are no different than they were. We all hit the same obstacles and have joys and victories and defeats. So I shared with you also that 1st and 2nd Timothy, Paul wrote those letters concerning doctrine. He told about the last days. Men will not endure sound doctrine. They'll say, oh, doctrine doesn't matter anymore. It's just tell everybody God loves them and Jesus died for them. And that latter statement, those are true. God does love us and Jesus died for us. But there's doctrine. If we are not grounded on the doctrine, those truths get watered down very easily. And then to Titus, he wrote about duty. And that's why this book appealed to me, and that I pulled over, parked, and studied it and did the PowerPoint, because we live in a day where duty is people just walk off the job. I've watched several people that I've gotten to know in business establishes that I go, and there'll be people there for 3 or 4 months, and I get to know them and talk to them, some Christians. And the next day, they're not there, and someone says, well, they just didn't show up, they quit. They just didn't come in, didn't say anything, they're gone. And I'm thinking, where is duty? Duty kicks in when we're grounded in doctrine, and duty kicks in when it's no longer joyful, or we're not seeing the results we want to see, or have hit a wall or something, discouragement. Duty kicks in and says, even if you don't feel like it, even if you don't feel like going to church, feel like reading the Bible, feel like getting up and doing something for the Lord that day and being nice, says, duty kicks in and says, you do it anyway. Do it anyway, until you can get your heart squared back around again and get moving down the line. All right, the Christian, and I shared this with you, and then we're into some new things. The Christian is to protect the gospel in 1 Timothy, proclaim the gospel in 2 Timothy, and practice the gospel in Titus. All right, welcome to the Good Workshop. And if you want to know where in the world are you talking about, I shared with you last week that a lot of pastors teach Titus with the theme of good works. I'm talking about good works, and you will see why, because it's mentioned several times in the book of Titus. And good works is getting back on your feet again and doing God's work, whether you feel like it or not. Once again, back to duty again. And so here are those verses, and just think through them. We'll hit them again, but I'll read them and just quickly comment, and we'll move on. And so we need to develop patterns of good works. In all things, showing yourself a pattern of good works. Look at this. In doctrine, showing uncorruptness, gravity, sincerity. Wow. We need to be zealous of good works. Who, Jesus, gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from all iniquity and purify unto himself a peculiar people, zealous of good works, just a desire and a drive to do good things because of what Jesus did for us. Ready to every good work, that we need to be ready to do good. Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. All right, Paul writes to Titus and he says, look, when it comes to your politicians, and that's what principalities and powers and magistrates are, in dealing with the politicians, he says, you be ready all the time to do something good. And the church today needs to connect with the politicians, needs to connect with elected officials, appointed officials, people over us, and find out. And I was talking to my pastor, and we're working on something. He asked me to work on something with him and turned me loose on it for a bit. And it all comes back to, we're getting out into the community. We're going to have in a couple of weeks on National Day of Prayer and Fasting. We're going to go to some of these places and send teams there just to pray outside. We're going to let them know they're there. We're going to call them and say we're coming. And the pastor always asks them, how can I pray for you? So they understand our church, that we send food to the poor. We step in where we can and when we can. And ready to good works. Careful to maintain good works. This is a faithful saying, and these things I will that you affirm constantly. Just keep saying them over and over, that they which have believed in God might be careful to maintain good works. These things are good and profitable unto men, unto all men. So he's saying you need to be careful that you don't fall away from it, that you don't get to the point of good intentions without follow through or promise something that you can't give. Do good works. Maintain your good works for necessary uses, and let ours also learn to maintain good works for necessary uses, that they be not unfruitful. He's telling, make good use of your time. Target your good works for that. You're going to get the most mileage out of it for the Lord, so that you're just not kicking dust. They're just saying, oh, I'm going over here and going to do this or this. Make sure that you know that you see an eternal end to that. That if you're feeding the poor, that the eternal end is, yes, you're feeding them so that they live another day, but an opportunity to share Christ and they can be saved, that's eternal. So there needs to be an eternal component to whatever we think of. All right, now, as I promised you last week, and if you did not read and watch the introduction, number 1, part 1, you need to go back and catch up on that. However, you're welcome to continue on and finish this one, because I promised that I would take you on an archaeological tour of today, of the island of Crete. And we'll just call this our road map. And before we get on that, before we take the road map around the island, here's our road map and our outline that we will use for the book of Titus. And I'll come back to that as we get into it and start in with number 1. All right, welcome to Titus Tours. It's an island of adventure. And so I appreciate this small map by Zigzag on Earth, and I want to give credit to whom's credit. If you will look at this is the island of Crete. It's about 150 miles wide. Keep that in mind, and that information was in part 1. I will blue arrow the 5 top archaeological sites in Crete. If you'll look at them, you'll see number 1 is right next to a city, and part of it, and outside, a seacoast city, and most of these are on the seacoast, on water. The cities are. They are ports. And if you will notice, 2, 3, 4 are great locations, but there's no cities. They're gone. And number 5 is an island, and you will be amazed when we take a look at that at this time. I've not been elaborate in this, but keep in mind of history, it goes back a while, but it is very Greek oriented, and Crete is a part of Greece, and that Greek architecture and that Greek influence is immense still today. When the Romans took over, they just basically changed the name of the gods to make them Roman gods. And as far as this island is concerned, they built some things, but they pretty well left the cities alone. They didn't find a lot of resistance there. It was more a waterway for the world and a stopover and a commerce, a seaport island is what it would be used for. Number 5 will be the fortress, and you'll see it when we get to it. All right, now I put the pronunciation down underneath, and it's not the pronunciation out of the dictionary. It's the one that I made up based upon the verbal, as I listened many times to that. And so this is pronounced Knossos, and that is number 1. As we go to Knossos, it was the capital of the Minoan civilization that predates the Greek. But you can see the Greek influence, or the Minoan influence into the Greek. And the same type of thought and the same type of structures and the similar buildings. The Greeks weren't really big on painting columns red and trimming black, but they would build them, and they were basically white, but not on this island. They used the rock that was there to a large degree. And there's no agricultural there that I know of. As I look at the island, the island of Crete does, but when I look at the fortress number 5, there's nowhere to grow anything. And so a lot of the island of Crete is a lot of rock. And since this was the capital of the Minoan civilization, this was where the king was. And this was King Minos. This is not King Midas. Do not confuse him or think that that's who that is. The king that's mythology with the golden touch. Everything he turned to gold. That's not this story. This is an entire genuine civilization. So I'm just going to let you enjoy flipping through. There's not a lot, but it gives you an idea of everything that's being dug up still. And the island has a lot to share. Stepping back more from the palace, you start to see walls, start to see rooms, where people live. Go inside. This is part of the palace of Minos. Look at the fresco walls. Can you see the water basin? You want to try to guess what this was? How about a spa? A bath? Here's a sketch of the full palace and what archaeologists have come up with and the pieces that they've dug here and there. An immense place. And then here's some of the things they've found, some of the just full urns, large pots in rooms. Look at their little pads that they would sit on. Again, architecture. This is incredible with the dolphins. And that is on a wall. And then in the museum, they have pulled the statues of individuals. Do you see the Roman without a head? But many of these are Minoan, the Minoan people. And there is a museum there. This is just one room of it. Okay, let's move to number 2. And you pronounce this Phaistos. Phaistos. We've moved a little away, in fact, opposite ends of the island. This is south, where the first one was north. Look at the steps up. Look at the rooms. Look at us out on the plains. There's see the city in the back right. Be place for agriculture. There's a well. This is a place where the palace was. The roof has gone, obviously, in the height to it, but you see the base and the structures of how it would have been built. The grand, perhaps, promenade as they dig more up. That's an ongoing site. We go over to number 3. We're back up on the north coast again, over to the east. This is pronounced Malia. Once again, Minoan urns, large urns. And when doing sites, archaeologists will build a sunscreen so that it gives some shade, but it lets sea breezes blow through the slits. They need air, not just to breathe and to stay cool, but also to blow dust away and to keep the diggings going so that you can see what you've dug up, and the next day you come back, they're not buried again. It's incredible. It's not a soccer field. But these are the ruins, the Minoan ruins at Malia. Here's a dagger that they found. Then move to number 4. Gortina. This is where the amphitheaters outside would start. This was for drama, a small, very small amphitheater. People come and sit, and then, of course, the dramas would be put on down low, but when they spoke, 200-300 people could hear easily. And if it went up higher at one point, it would hold more. And do not ask me to translate that. I was looking for a translation. No one cared to publish that at this point. I suppose at the museum it might be there. And then let's go to the last one, Spinalonga. And it's an island right off of the coast. And can you see the island of Crete to the upper left? But take a good hard look. You see the boats coming in and docking. That's tourists coming in. And that gives you perspective that it's not a gigantic island, but it's large enough that it was always a fortress island. You didn't grow anything there. You didn't let animals run there. There's nothing to eat. But it was just a big clump of rock that they built walls around and ramparts. And you'll see some of that as you look up on the higher ground to the upper right. Some of the round, do you see the round buildings? We'll see them up close in a minute. And of course, the way that you made a way up a mountain is build a long road one way and just turn, wind, and cut up, and then make a path on the next level, and you just keep going. Then homes would be built in between that. And so if you look at where you'd enter into a home here, if you go up the next level and see the door up above to the right on that wall, that's the next road up there. You can walk on the roofs of the buildings. So they would cut them out of the hill. Here's one of the ramparts, the fortresses. pulling back down by the water. Look at the strength of the walls, and then look at the walls going up the hill, up to the very top. And if you're warding off an enemy, you want the high ground, always. And they seem to have higher ground. They could keep retreating up if they needed to. But once you got up there, there's nowhere to go. But the population would live there and serve there, and they would build their homes. To the left, we see the Mediterranean Sea. There's the very thick wall right below this. But they would build their homes right up to the wall. And that would perhaps be a walkway between that tall one and that inner one. You can see different types of architecture just for the doorways. Square ones, rounded ones. And so this will conclude our tour, our Titus tour. And as we get through and go through our study, if something crops up, we'll return to the island and we'll look at something that's been dug up. And I continue to do an archaeological search, not on the island, but here from home. And if something comes up, I'll be glad to share it with the class, and you'll have the benefit if you are listening online. So these are the contributors that's made this lesson go. Others will be added as we go along, and I want to thank you. And my prayer is, might the Book of Titus spur you to do good works, to walk with God, and in times when you don't feel like going to church or reading the Bible or praying or doing good works, suck it up and do what's your duty. Do what God's called you to do anyway. Do it because it's right and it's good, and God will bless you for it. Thank you again. Here's where you can find me. I'll be glad to email you a copy of the lesson itself that is handed out in class. And you can have that and ask me for future ones, and I'll give them to you as you go through. As we go through the book, you can look at the lesson sheet, and you'll know where we're headed. It has a lot of Greek in it, yes. So I'll leave it at that, and I would trust, please come back when we do, or look up chapter 1. Because after the next month, they'll all be up there. Father, thank you for this day, and we thank you for this great book. Speak to our hearts as we go through it and stir us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.